morning. It's immense pleasure and privilege to have this morning President, His Excellency, President llves with us. So I think that we have only 1 hour, so I will make this introduction very short. But there are a few things I have to mention. And probably there is no need to introduce President llves' biography here. But I have to say that he is one of the most vocal and strong supporter of idea of Europe, whole, free, and at peace. And entire his biography has been a biography of freedom fighter, starting from Radio Free Europe to Estonian politics and then European politics. So he was also one of those European leaders who stood on the Rustaveli Avenue in August 2008 when Russian forces were advancing toward capital. And it was Georgia's Ich bin ein Berliner moment. And President llves, with his other 5 colleagues, played the role of President Kennedy, the role that President Kennedy played in the 60s. So we hope that they're going to be Georgia's tear down this war moment as well. And I'm pretty sure President llves is working on this pretty hard. Even some people say that he is more strong proponent of Georgia's security policy agenda than Estonia's policy. And I see opposition faces here, and then they would say that he's even more stronger proponent of Georgia's security policy agenda than anyone else. So without further delay, let me ask President llves to make an introductory speech, and then the floor will be open for questions and answers. Thank you, Mr. President, for you.
Can I sit? Can I speak?
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be back in Georgia, where I have been, which has been for some reason deep in my heart ever since my first visit in 1998 when I was foreign minister. The last 17 years have been rather tumultuous, and I fear that Europe is going to be tumultuous for some time. There we had this, 1989 we had this annus mirabilis moment, 25 years later it was 2014 that we had our annus horribilis moment. Most of what we have believed in since actually World War II in terms of the fundamental agreements upon which European security has been based. At the beginning of the UN Charter, the 1975 Helsinki Final Act, the 1990 Paris Charter, and so on, have basically ceased to carry the weight that we all thought they did, because basically you can violate international law and change borders with impunity. Not that Georgians needed any lesson in this, but I think West Europeans did, since they certainly did not take the message in 2008, deciding within a month of the ceasefire in August that Sarkozy said, first having made his plan and then taken credit for it, and then when it was not met and Russian troops remained, the same person came out and said, thank God, common sense prevailed, and the EU proceeded full speed ahead on their strategic partnership with Russia. So they didn't learn anything then. We didn't learn anything then. Well, Estonia did, but you know, we weren't listened to. Which is one of the lessons of being in the European Union, that it's not enough to be in, but to make your voice heard. Nonetheless, I think now people have figured out that there's something very wrong in the security architecture of Europe. And so we're in a new phase, different from what we have faced in the past. But I'm not going to talk about big global things so much today. The title of my talk, which I kind of vaguely remember, was Walking the European Path. Actually, it came from a Borges short story, The Garden of Forking Paths. If any of you have read Borges, I recommend it. But in any case, we do live in this garden of forking paths, and I would say basically the choice of countries like Georgia is there's a fork, which is you have in the road or in the path, and you have to decide. So I would turn it, the title would be, yes, there's a forking path, and your choice is, do you want to be happy or do you want to get what you want? That's really the choice that comes down to, and I'll talk about getting what you want versus being happy. They're two very different things. I think what is important to keep in mind is that, we signed it in 1995. Poland signed their association agreement with the European Union in 1990. There also was no statement about anything about a future European perspective. Now, Poland and Estonia joined in 2004. We joined the European Union in 2004. So Poland's path was 14 years. Our path was 9 years. And there was no statement about joining the European Union. I think, in general, we should pay less attention to what the statements say in final documents and concern ourselves more with the actual process of what has to be done. So you may be dissatisfied with the speed with which your country is moving in the European Union, but the trick is to keep working and managing your expectations, or to paraphrase garbage, the trick is to be banned garbage. The trick is to keep moving. And I can say basically, when I was foreign minister in 1996, EU membership, NATO membership, for Estonia seemed as remote as the possibility of an Estonian walking on the moon. No Estonian has walked on the moon 20 years later, but now, having been in the European Union and NATO for 11 years, I don't think there's anyone in Estonia who could think of life outside of it, and rather we're all concerned about little petty details on how to get something, or one thing or another, out of the European Union or out of NATO, or do something in there. The idea, it becomes very quickly very normal, and that is what has happened. But what we do maintain to this day is that we are one of the most pro-integration countries in Europe. We are one of the most pro-integration countries on the one hand in terms of integrating Europe and making Europe closer, and also in integrating our friends, such as Georgia, into the European Union. And that's one of our very clear foreign policy goals within the European Union, is bringing Georgia ever closer to us for me, the ultimate goal is membership, but this is something that has to be decided by all of the European Union. Now, if we look at the Eastern Partnership Summit in Riga, which I guess, again, I understand there was some disappointment, I actually think the outcome is very positive, and you just have to keep working at it. This is an instrument that brings the partnership countries closer to the EU. It is not an enlargement instrument, but it doesn't exclude membership. It's a tool, and this is what you need to use it as. One clear component of this is the visa liberalization aspect of the partnership, which is, as I again said yesterday in the press conference, it is a technical matter, and you just have to work on the technical side of it. in fact, very much of what the European Union is about, is dealing with technical issues, being good and solving technical problems. It's not about the language, it's not about, oh, you have a European perspective. No, it's about getting stuff done. And what needs to be done in terms of visa liberalization actually is really a technical matter and not about, are you considered European or not. It is not a political decision. These decisions, as are very, very many decisions in the European Union, really based more on technical issues, on how well something works. So basically, if everything works out and you do the technical stuff that is needed for the visa liberalization action plan, the decision will come. And then on top of that, you'll also have to wait, as always happens in the European Union, the disappointing 4 to 5 month period between the decision being made and the implementation of the visa liberation action plan, because it's not as if, the decision is made, okay, visa-free travel for Georgians, and that the next day you go with your passport and they still look at it and they still will require a visa until the thing is done. So it's the technical side of things that I think needs to be much more attention needs to be paid. The other thing that I would look at, that is really important, is the DCFTA, or the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement that was signed last year, which in the first 6 months of its enactment, Georgian exports to the European have increased 12%. Now, 12% increase in exports in 6 months is a big deal. Again, it sounds boring and technical. It is boring and technical, but that's what the European Union is really about. And those of you who are here from the European Union, I see there's some ambassadors. I don't know which countries you're from, but if you're from the European Union, you know how much of it is boring and technical. But that's what you make your living doing, right? I used to be one of those people too. It's actually fun being dealing with boring technical issues in the European Union, because then you realize that in fact so much of life is about what you actually do rather than all kinds of high-flow rhetoric that we hear all the time. So with the DCFTA, you have taken a significant step forward. And so with what you already have, I think you can do a lot, and you should use it as best as you can. We have certain, we did before we joined, and even now, Estonia has one of the highest absorption capacities, if not the highest absorption capacity of EU money in the European Union. Why do we have that? It's because of the boring technical details that we actually fill out our applications for EU funding either more accurately or more honestly. I don't know, but we get more money out of the budget than percentage-wise, of course. We're a small country, we don't get that much, but we get what we get more than others because we don't lie, cheat, steal, or make up numbers. But those are technical details, and I guess Estonians are good at technical details. We don't always get the big picture, but we do tend to get the little things right, and I would say that's what we should work on, because that's where the good stuff comes from the European Union. When we look more broadly at the issue of just the European Union, you are still engaged in probably one of the most exciting things that anyone can do, which is state building. You are building your own state. You have had to face calamities that we, for example, have not. We have not been invaded by Russia, and these are things that really are major obstacles, and you are in media res, in the middle of the thing, and you are facing difficult challenges, but I find these challenges always very exciting because you actually are building up your country. In my own country is kind of getting, we've done it, and now we're sort of spending a lot of time whining, complaining about why one thing or another is not as good as it should be, but in fact, the exciting part is actually creating and building your country anew, and that was what you are doing. And the kinds of things that I think are most important for any country to become successful is creating the trust in in society, the trust in society trusts the state. And I think you're well along on those issues. There's nothing that sharpens the mind on the existence of a state like having your state invaded, frankly. I mean, it's not something I wish on anyone. Corruption is clearly an issue that face all countries that have come out of authoritarian regimes, and Georgia has done a huge amount in overcoming that compared to some of the other countries, and I basically think that that's a stumbling block, will be a stumbling block more and more for future enlargements because of the experience that the European Union has had with some of the new members, so-called new members. When I look at, I spent the last 10 years or so just being interested in what is it that makes a country successful that has come out of authoritarianism and communism, but not only communism, also sort of authoritarian, totalitarian regimes, and the principles that I seem to come down to are fairly basic. One of them is, which I actually remember reading about 1988-89 in a political science journal. At the time, that communism was still dominating in Europe, so it was a comparative review of democratization in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And one of the conclusions they had was that if you have a presidential system, you're more apt to have a slide towards authoritarianism and corruption than if you have a parliamentary system in which the president is the head of state, but does not wield tremendous executive power. And if you actually look at the European Union today, I mean, Europe recapitulates that finding of before the fall of communism, which is that, in fact, virtually all of the countries that have joined the European Union since the collapse of communism have more or less parliamentary systems. I mean, I can say that Poland and Romania slightly more towards the French system, but nonetheless, the systems are fundamentally, the executive authority is fundamentally in the hands of the Prime Minister, and the parliamentary system, the Prime Minister can fall at any time. The head of state remains for his full term because he represents the state, but he does not have executive authority and executive power, and I think it's the step that Georgia has taken here is a very good one in guaranteeing democracy. Clearly, you have allows you to escape some of the difficulties that we've seen, and you can see around you, and I won't name any countries to the north, but when you have some strong executive presidential systems, the trend is inevitably toward abuse of authority and the creation of crony capitalism. So I think that you're doing very well. One of the things that is in thinking about what is it that is successful, I actually is an example from my own country, but it's not my idea. The idea comes from Anders Oslo, who is the great economist of post-communist systems. It's spelled A-S-L-U-N-D with a little O over the A. He's a Swede, but he lives in the United States. But he's written tens of books on transitions from communism to capitalism. And one of his books, which he basically sums up, is his understanding of what is a successful country, successful post-communist country. He focuses on Estonia, and he focuses on one thing he said is absolutely crucial, and that is actually our 1995 law on government, which has nothing to do with economics at all. I mean, it is the law on how you run government. And the law, which at that time was the only post-communist country that had this, and it is a law that doesn't even apply in some EU countries, I can say, unfortunately for them. But the law on government basically defines what is what is political and what is not political. And the law basically says, okay, you have a minister for all the ministries, and the minister can take 2 or 3 advisors, and then below that, you have a civil service. You have a permanent undersecretary, people under that. I mean, every ministry is the same sort of basic structure. But civil service, the highest civil service servant is the permanent undersecretary who has a term. So what happens with that is that means that when the government changes, sometimes happens rather often in certain countries, sometimes even mine, is that nothing changed in the civil service. Now there are other countries I have visited, in fact, in the neighborhood, where every time the government changes, even the cleaning ladies in the ministry change. I mean, this is, which means, what does that do for state building? What it means is that you start all over again. All over again, you have to start training people. And so there is no continuity, there is no developed experience, you don't have the historical memory, you don't have all of the educational stuff, you don't have all the experience of how you do the things that you have to do. And I can't really talk about countries, but basically I know that when Estonia successfully was invited to begin negotiations with the EU, and some of our other colleagues were not invited toward our south, then one country did an internal review of what it was that, why did those damn Estonians get invited and we didn't? There was, I don't know, a diplomat who from that country told me that they did a review. So what had that country done differently? And they found too that the crucial difference was that Estonia did not have political appointees as ambassadors, or political appointees, or friends of the president, or friends of whatever. We had professional diplomats, and this other country that did not get the invitation at the time still had people who were ambassadors, not because they had gone through the foreign service, but because they were friends of someone. And so that's one of the crucial things I recommend to all countries on how to move ahead. And the other thing that we've done in Estonia, which, it wasn't a real decision. It's been a slow process, but it was, at least my thinking in about 1993, 94, we were completely despondent, despairing. Here we are. My country is finally independent. And we are 13 times poorer than Finland to our north, whereas before the war we were more or less had the same GDP. And now we were 13 times poorer. We had more or less the same GDP per capita, not the same GDP, but Finland's bigger. But the point is that it was a disaster. And we had no infrastructure, nothing. 50 years of occupation, Soviet crap. Just awful. And so we're looking, what are we going to do? It's not enough to be independent. You have to get out of this mess. And then I was struck by one thing, which was that it was 1993. And I've been a geek all my whole life. But suddenly there was this thing called Mosaic, which was the first web browser. The first web browser only came out in 1993, July, when Mark Andreessen invented it at the University of Champaign. Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. And here we were on a level playing field. And IT is the one area where basically, you are on a level playing field. You still are on a level playing field. Back in the 90s, the sort of big mantra in economics was the economics of scale. If you wanted to be successful, you had to be big. Now, this was not exactly sort of really heartwarming and encouraging if you're a country of 1.4 million, right? Economies down. There are companies that are bigger than my country. So, so when everyone's talking about how you have to be big in order to be successful, and being small is very impressive. But then you realize that in fact IT is one area where size does not matter, and so I started pushing the government at the time just to focus on that. I was a civil servant at the time, so I kept telling these people to do that. And slowly Estonia has taken on well, has become actually an IT powerhouse, even though we're only 1.3. I guess one of the big things that helped was having some guys from Estonia invent Skype, which put Estonia on the map. But that's anyone can invent Skype. It just needs smart people who have courage to come up with their ideas and do it. And we have, for us, it has been what has allowed us to leap ahead, far ahead of many other countries, including old Europe, old members. They're still 11 years later, new members. But even old members are not even close to what we do as new members. You can see that it bothers me, as you know. But anyway, I just mentioned that as something which, I mean, in Georgia right now, I mean, we have 12 people studying cybersecurity at the Tallinn Technical University. I mean, that's only one very detailed subject. And this is one area where I see Estonia and Georgia as really being able to cooperate very strongly. I encourage Estonian companies to come to Georgia, and they do, and I encourage Georgians who want to work on things such as e-governance or cybersecurity to come to Estonia. We even have the first and hitherto only master's degree in e-governance, which actually is a joint degree in two separate subjects that were never combined before. One is IT, the other one is public administration. Because in fact, the public administration for 2,500, 3,000, if you think about the Egyptians, 5,000 years, administration has been paper-based, which means serial processing, people going from one place to another place to another place. Then in fact, suddenly with IT, you no longer need serial processing of paper, of physical items. You have electrons that move at the speed of light back and forth. And in fact, you can redo completely how you run a state, how you administer a state. And that's what and it's something which we don't have the answer. We're only discovering these things. We may be way ahead of everyone else, and we are when in the European Union, because they don't believe you can do things with electrons that they do with paper to this day. But you can, but there's so many things that have yet to be figured out, new creative ideas, and I would encourage Georgians, as you are in the process of state building, to actually employ your own creative thinking and not copy others, not copy others. I mean, you can copy the good stuff, but don't copy stuff from other people just because other people do it. A couple of years ago, actually, 14 years ago, I wrote a thing. Partially, I wrote it was a thing I wrote as bad cop. There's a very good friend of mine who I got to meet in 1984 when we worked together at Radio Free Europe. His name was Ron Asmus, and he later on became the architect of NATO enlargement. But we worked together in the basement of Radio Free Europe. And then back after I was more or less unemployed because the coalition changed, and I was no longer foreign minister. All the civil service were still remained in place, but there was a new foreign minister, and I was kind of despondent, and I was a member of parliament. So he actually put me on this road show, which we were doing together, going to various countries, talking about what you need to do in order to join NATO and the European Union. And in the process of this, I wrote something which he called the catechism. And so I was the bad cop with the catechism. But I have these rules which I recently looked over, and I realized that these rules still apply. And I'll give you some of the rules for joining the European Union and NATO. Point 1, figure out what you really want. Do not say 1 week that you want into the EU, the next week you want a common economic space. In 1998, I remember, within 3 weeks, President Kuchma of Ukraine said, first, Ukraine's most strategic partner is Russia. Next week, he said the most important strategic partner was Europe, or the EU. And then the third week, he said the most important strategic partner is the United States. basically words matter when you make statements to people about who your most important country is, or whatever you say. People listen. So rule number one, figure out what you really want and then say it. Rule number two, say yes only when you can deliver. Don't say yes to things that you can't deliver on, because if you don't do, you say, yes, I'm going to do this, this, and this because, you think the European Union or NATO wants you to do it, and say, yes, I'll do it. Well, then say yes only if you can. Three, if you've already said yes, then do deliver. Many countries lose credibility when they promise things and don't do it. A couple of things that's a good thing to forget, or to ignore and not to use. One of my favorites, and I used to have big arguments back when I was ambassador and I had the president who kept talking, he kept saying, we have always been a part of European civilization. It doesn't matter. I mean, you could be part of European civilization all you want, but I mean, the point is, as I said earlier, joining the European Union and NATO is a technical issue. It's not about, the Huntingtonian line or something. So forget about cultural heritage making you automatically a part of Europe. Well, it does, yes, and it makes you, geography makes you automatically a part of Europe too, but it doesn't make you automatically a part of the European Union. And I mean, a corollary of this is that we are the last bulwark of civilization against the barbarian from the East. I mean, everyone says that. I mean, has said that through the years. I mean, my president said it too. I said, stop saying that. I mean, the people to our west were saying we were the last bulwark against them, pointing to us, and then it's a reductio ad absurdum, and don't do it. So, Marxism is something that should be avoided, but I do not mean Marxism of Karl. I mean the Marxism of Groucho. The word, I mean, it doesn't really mean that much these days, but there used to be these. There was films of the Marx Brothers. They were very funny. You should look them up on YouTube. They're really great. But anyway, there's one film in which the sort of main Marx brother, Groucho Marx, in a film from the 1940s, goes into a bank. And he goes to the bank teller, and he pulls out his gun, puts it to his head, and says, give me all your money or I'll shoot myself. Well, this is what a lot of East European countries do. I mean, I think the first person who did it was actually Mikhail Gorbachev, who said that, give me your money or 25 million Soviets will flee the Soviet Union and join your country. Well, the later iterations of this argument, if you don't let us into the European Union, we are going to collapse. Complete hell will break loose, and all our people will become refugees in the European Union. It's not a good argument to make. I mean, the last argument you want to make, in fact, is that if you don't take us in, we'll collapse. I mean, the whole point of getting into the European Union is you can stand on your own and be an independent country and survive and do well, not that take us in or we're going to fall apart and all hell is going to break loose. So do not say you're going to self-destruct if you don't get into NATO or the European Union. One thing which I will say now, which is this is not a religious, but this is rather a moral issue. The West is Lutheran and it's not Catholic. That is to say that God helps those who help themselves, and confessions don't make things better. Meaning, if you want to be in the European Union and NATO, help yourself. Don't say, oops, I screwed up, forgive me, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I mean, it really comes down to what you do yourself. Privatization, liberalization of the economy, reform of the security apparatus, civilian control of the military. These are normal and successful policies no matter what. Rule of law, lack of corruption, elections free of irregularities, a free press are not stepping stones to the West. They are the prerequisites to being in the European Union and NATO. So, next thing, point 7. No one wanted us either. I mean, as late as 1997, the Chancellor of Germany was against the accession of the Baltic states because Germany saw that, Russia was more important. you know, they had a loi de regard. And I'm not even going to talk about NATO, where opposition to our joining lasted until 2002, 2 years before we were joined. So the fact that there is opposition, and probably there is some opposition to your joining the European Union and NATO and some countries, just keep working at it. I mean, don't sort of go, oh my God, they're against us, what are we going to do? No, we'll keep working at it, and you know, we did, and we kept banging our head until finally our heads were stronger than the wall we were banging our heads against. Contribute, Georgia, I mean, this is something I'm going to tell Georgians, because I mean, Georgians are one of the great contributors, so there's nothing new for you to learn about that. I mean, if you look at Georgia and ISAF, Georgia currently in Afghanistan, I mean, Georgia really does punch way above its weight. That's something I recommend to other countries that, in fact, don't punch at all. I don't know, I mean, it's more or less what I basically told people then, and I think it's kind of true. The last thing I would say is work hard on your friends. I mean, your friends are not necessarily just the new neighbors, but make sure you talk to your friends all the time. That the people that are your friends are the people who then, when the doors close and the EU or NATO is sitting there, they're the ones who stick up for them. I remember we had one so-called friend. I mean, he always tells us that we're your biggest advocates. We're your biggest advocates. This is a foreign minister of a large country in Europe. When in fact, every time the doors were closed, they said, no, no, don't let them in. But you do have friends, and you use them. And we, for example, had one good example. Sweden and Denmark were really our good friends, in the sense that they would stand up and say what we said. I mean, they would support. They would stand for our positions in the closed, when the EU Council meets and then they close the doors. And it's only the prime ministers. We knew that the Swedish prime minister and the Danish prime minister would be supporting us. Either, and I think in the case of NATO, then the Danish prime minister, because the Swedish prime minister, of course, I mean, they're not in NATO. So basically, since I'm running out of time, I would say, to sum it all up, as I said at the beginning, you can be happy or you can get what you want. If you're happy, then you don't do reforms. You allow pre-trial detentions of non-violent crimes and don't do anything about it. You don't reform things. Or you can get what you want, in which you don't have pre-trial detention for non-violent crimes, and you do put genuinely corrupt people in jail after being convicted in a court of law, not before. And then when the EU says, you need this and this and this in order to get visa-free travel, well, then you do this, this, and this. But that's not always going to make you happy. On the other hand, you can be happy and say, oh boy, I really got that guy today, or something. But that's not going to get you where you want it. That's not going to get you what you want. So the choice ultimately comes down in this Borgesian garden of fortune paths. You want to be happy, or do you want to get what you want? Estonia is not always happy. In fact, we're often miserable and unhappy. That's just not the weather and being in the cold and the north and the dark. It's also because we want to get what we want. We don't necessarily end up being happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for excellent speech, excellent messages, and just word.
Well, I can keep talking for a while. Just the dead air.
So it's better if
I used to be in the radio. You can't have that.
You continue, but thank you for thank you for excellent messages. To summarize, for Georgian political elite, don't do stupid things and do what you have to do and stop waiting.
that, that the good stuff happens after you leave office, because in fact most reforms take a while. Most reforms are not popular, and you know, I mean, someone just I would say the real message for the elite is understand that someone else will get credit for all the good things you do. I mean, I left. I mean, I was no longer foreign minister in 2002. The agreement to join the European Union was signed in 2002. I was no longer foreign minister. Someone else who did nothing at all. It was like, I took Estonia into the European Union. I took Estonia into NATO. And when that person, I remember I was invited by our friends in NATO to the NATO Prague summit, where the decision was made. Because they said, it's coming, just come, you did so much. And so I was there, and then the person who was the foreign minister after me came and said, what are you doing here? I said, I was invited. Anyway, so just be assured, rest assured, someone else will get credit for everything good you do.
Thank you. Thank you, and thanks for the set of rules from Erasmus. I just enjoyed listening and completely agree. And probably Georgians have something to contribute to Asun's ideas.
No, those are my ideas. See, he asked me to be, he went around saying, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, and he said, you play bad cop. So it was we had this little tandem. He was the good cop, I was the bad cop.
Very good, very interesting. It's, even though in the civil service, what we do here, when the government changes, we also change head of opera house, sports federations, as well as the directors from the theaters. So it's just something we have to change. So we have time left, therefore I will try to just let the audience ask questions. I have my question as well, mostly related to NATO, but maybe we can just
let me say one thing about NATO, just to make things clear. I had a big, I mean, those who are old enough from the foreign ministry remember this, but when I became foreign minister, they were really, 80% of the foreign ministry was against me, because the Estonia's foreign policy was NATO, 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 and European Union will come anyway. And having sat there in Washington as ambassador and looking and talking to people, I came to the conclusion that we will never be allowed into NATO unless we are in the European Union. Because as long as we are not in the European Union, there are a number of big countries in the European Union that will veto our membership in NATO. Because you can't, you don't want to offend that big country to the east or your north. So we will never let you into NATO. So I said, well, in that case, but we also knew that if you're in the European Union, they will not and cannot veto a fellow EU member's membership in NATO. It is not to be done. You don't do that. And so I came to the foreign minister and said, now we have to join the European Union. That must be a foreign policy priority. NATO will, I mean, that too, but the point is that without the European Union, there will be no NATO. 80% of the foreign minister was completely against me, thought I was a complete and utter idiot. But in any case, so I would say that I understand Georgia really wants to get into NATO, but I will tell you now that unless you also, in parallel, do your EU homework, there will be countries that can and probably will veto Georgia membership in NATO, but they will not be able to do that if it looks like you're going to immediately become a member of the European Union. So you really have to do the two things in tandem.
Thank you. Questions? Oh, yeah. First, this side and then. Do you have a microphone back there?
No, I can speak loudly. Okay?
You can take mine.
I moved. No.
Yes.
Hello? Larissa from agenda.ge. So some people think that that you should have made more dramatic decisions regarding the countries like Georgia and Ukraine in Riga, which would be a more clear message for Russia that Russia has no say in the relationship between the EU and its eastern partners. This came after Russia's foreign minister Lavrov said that EU's decisions should not violate legitimate interests of Russia. I don't know what he meant by this, but that's what he said. And people thought that you needed to send more clear and stronger signals and messages to Russia. Do you have an opinion on this?
Well, I mean, I would have preferred somewhat stronger message, but you have to understand the European Union is consensus-based. I mean, what comes out is what everyone agrees to, it's not what one country thinks. I mean, different countries have different opinions. Now, of course, the legitimate concerns of Russia in an environment of complete and utter illegitimate behavior is, of course, an interesting concept, so I don't really take that seriously. But in terms of the Riga summit, yes, I would have preferred stronger statements, but I mean, that's the best you can do. And the European Union is a consensus-based organization. Right now, I'm very happy that the European Union is on consensus has imposed sanctions on Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. There are countries that don't like that either because they're losing money. Of course, we're losing percentage-wise more money because of the sanctions in those countries, but nonetheless, that's a different issue. The point is, you get what you get out of the European Union.
Okay, since I have the microphone.
No, someone else. No, someone else. Otherwise,
Thank you, Kostava. I want to tell first of all, a big thank you for your personal contribution from 2006, especially, and also before foreign minister. I remember well your help and support in all NATO EU fora, and I hope that from next year on, when you're going to leave your office, you will have more time to help Georgia. Some Georgians are helping Ukrainians now, so maybe you can help us in the same way. We need you are the best leader to help Georgia in this case. My question would be about Putin's Russian, how you view the future of these sanctions, as well as Putin's dealings with leaders, European leaders and NATO leaders. How you see development the story in the years to come?
Well, I mean, who knows what the June Council will do, but basically it seems as if, given the absence of any change in the situation in the Donbass, that these sanctions will continue until the Minsk II agreements are met. That's the way it's set. I mean, whether or not one thinks the Minsk II agreements are good is a different matter, but our legalistic approach is that, well, if you have the Minsk agreement, then sanctions are contingent upon Minsk II being followed, and since Minsk II is not being followed, then the sanctions will continue or will be extended for at least another 6 months, because basically we don't think for the next 3 weeks Minsk II will be implemented. But maybe it will be. Merab too. There it is, Minsk II, everything's wonderful, we'll give up sanctions. But I don't think that's going to happen right now. The future of Russia, I don't know. I mean, it's hard enough predicting the future of Estonia, so I can't predict what Mr. Putin will do at all. There's a woman right there who's had her hand up. Right there, stand up, you, yes, ask. Well, don't give the microphone up when you have it. I mean, give it to the next person. Don't take it away. Please.
Tbilisi based journalist. I would like to go back to the boring and technical details we were talking about before. And can you explain how the EU residents idea came up, was developed in Estonia, and what Georgia can learn from it in terms of attracting investments?
The e-residency program.
The e-residence.
Right. Well, it's a natural outgrowth, actually, of the system that we have put into place in Estonia based on two critical aspects that you need for a functioning e-society. One is a genuine identity. The problem is, I mean, there was this 1993 cartoon in the New Yorker. It's got two dogs in front of a computer, and one dog says to the other, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Well, that sums up the issue of all of the internet, is that no one knows who you really are. Estonia, with its two-factor ID system, which I understand you are going through and implementing here, yes? I mean, it gives you a concrete identity. That gives you the security that is necessary and that you don't get if you use your credit card online. It's one of the dumbest things you could possibly do. But anyway, so you have a two-factor system. I mean, it's not enough to have a password. I mean, one thing is on a chip, on a card, on your phone, with a chip, and the other one is then whatever you use, your eyeball, your fingerprint, or a number. And the other one is the distributed architecture that we use that allows everything to be connected to everything else, and not a single database, but everything is independent, which gives you more security. Once you have that and you implement it in a society or in a country as we have, then sort of look at it and go, wow, this doesn't need to be strictly our country based. So, I mean, one of the things we're doing, I mean, previous to the e-residency, is that if you, I mean, what we're working on right now with the Finns is that I mean, we have a digital prescription system. So anywhere, I mean, 99.9% of prescriptions in Estonia are done online. You go to the doctor, he says, okay, you need penicillin, writes it in the computer, you go with your card to any pharmacy in the country, stick in your card, put in your number, and then the pharmacist says, oh, you get this, and gives you the... Well, once you have the system, you realize, well, actually, I mean, they have the same system in Finland, so why don't we compute it? I mean, you know, Finns, we get 7 million Finns visiting Estonia every year, because Estonia is a lot of fun to visit if you live in Finland. No, I mean, you know, no, I mean, that was a joke. If there are any Finns here, that was just a joke. But anyway, so people come from Finland, and they lose their medicine. People still lose, especially when you're having too good a time, you may lose your medicine. So the idea is that if you take your ID card, if you lose your medicine in Finland, or if an Estonian loses medicine in Lapland or something, then he doesn't have, I mean, how is he going to get his prescription? So, I mean, the idea is that then you go with your ID card, stick it into the computer in the pharmacy, and then you get it. Well, I mean, once you do that, and you realize that this is a system that allows you services to operate all over and securely, well, then the next step is e-residency, where you offer people this service of having a chip and a unique identity and being able to use it. People keep showing this to me. I guess I have to end up.
We have another 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me just say one more point and interrupt, because I forgot to make it before, just because I come back to this EU-NATO thing all the time, because I keep hearing it in my discussion with people. People always ask me, what is, you know, should we do EU or NATO? Or why do one and why not the other? Why do the real thing that I think people need to understand, and I use this all the time because the same question that was always asked of me in Estonia when we were leading up to joining. The way to understand both NATO and the EU are major reform efforts, but they differ in one respect. What joining NATO is buying a suit of armor. You have to do a lot. First, you have to get in shape to fit into the suit of armor. And secondly, you have to pay for the rest of your life 2% of your income in order to keep this suit of armor. I mean, some countries pay less, but we do our 2%. Joining the European Union is a much more difficult and long-lasting process, because basically what it means is that you end up replacing every bone in your body. I mean, think of being sort of, you have, you know, you have this old creaky skeletal system, you have osteoporosis, your joints are worn out. And so every couple of months you go and have an operation and they take a brand new shiny titanium bone, also known as the acquis communautaire. And so they operate out this arm, they put in a new thing there, and then they operate your knee, and then they operate your shoulder. I mean, you operate yourself, basically. But anyway, so you get, everything is replaced with titanium. There's only one bone you can't replace, and that's your skull. But anyway, but that's, so what you end up after joining the European Union is you don't have a suit of armor, but you have a brand new skeleton. It is the acquis communautaire. It is the legal system of the European Union that allows your country to operate in a completely different way. Of course, the final thing I would say is you also have to follow the rules, because there are some countries I won't mention right now that, I mean, they have the acquis communautaire, and they have all of the rules that they've agreed to, but they don't follow them. That gets you in trouble and probably gets you a default, if not ejection from the Eurozone. I'm just in there with the Swedish hat.
Yeah, last question. Last question from lady behind it, under the tree. So, and,
Well, this is actually Estonian from the
Oh,
USA. Well, first of all, dear President, thank you for a really interesting and engaging speech and conversation with really important messages for Georgia. Well, my question wouldn't be that political because there were enough political things, but this would be related to you, because every time I see influential and intelligent people like you are, the thing that really interests me, and I think that for most of the people here would be interesting too, is we know that presidents have advisors, but are there people who are role models for you, and also the people whose advices really matter to you, and whose advices you really take into consideration?
Well, I think I've been doing most of my life by the seat of my pants. I would say probably the most important influence on me was actually Columbia College and Columbia University, and their required courses in political philosophy and in the humanities. If you ask me what are my role models, I would say they're all dead. I would also say never cite anyone who's alive, but anyway, the point is that my role models are all dead. And they are...
Who are they?
Well, I mean, beginning with Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Politics, skipping ahead, Nicomachean, and also the Nicomachean Ethics, moving on to basically, for me, the Enlightenment, Locke, Two Treatises on Government is probably one of the most important things that I've read in my life. On Liberty by John Stuart Mill is really important. So, I mean, those are my role models. They're the people that made me think. The other thing that's been important in my life, which is strictly a result of an accident, but completely by accident, I had a math teacher who was doing her PhD in mathematics education, and she had this crazy idea of teaching people to program at an early age. So I learned how to program computers at age 13. And it was a simple language. It was baby Fortran, known as BASIC, but I was 13 years old. That was 48 years ago. And when I was in college, since I already knew how to program, it was kind of easy to learn how to learn new languages, and I made a little money on the side working in a lab programming. And that has been, I mean, all of my whole experience with promoting IT and getting schools online and getting people to study those things comes out of my own experience that, in fact, there's nothing, I mean, I've never been afraid of computers or mathematics because I had a math teacher when I was 13, which is why I urge Georgians to start teaching kids how to program at an early age, and I encourage, I mean, that's why I've been telling Estonians, learn math, learn how to program, do it at an early age. It's like playing a violin. The earlier you start, the better you're at it. You learn a language as a kid, you don't have an accent. You learn a language as an adult, you never have native facility. So learn math, study the STEM subject, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and study philosophy, and especially study the Enlightenment era. Democracy in Europe is based on, and democracy in the world is based on fundamental ideas that were really developed in the 18th century and then further developed in the 19th and 20th, but basically study those things. Much of what we are seeing today I know we have to go, but much of what we see today with Russia's behavior on disinformation, you could characterize as a counter-enlightenment, not like the sort of Herder and Fichte and Hegel counter-enlightenment, but a concrete destruction of the idea of truth as we know it. Empirical truth, as defined by Berkeley and Locke and Hume, is being destroyed by saying there are multiple truths. I stick to Karl Popper and say what is true is that which cannot be falsified.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for an excellent speech. I will offer this record of your speech to Georgian universities. It's really very important, and I don't want to finish without thanking Ambassador Cook and Ambassador Ahmedyan for doing great job for both of our countries and building our friendship brick by brick and strengthening. Thank you, Mr. President, once again, and please join me thanking President Ingles for his service.